Welcome to this evening's event around Hydrogen Energy 4.0. My name's Erol Harvey. I've been involved with ANT since they've started on this journey some years ago, looking at how to develop hydrogen as a useful fuel and energy source in Australia. And we're very lucky today to have people from Hydrogenics who are experts in building systems and components for this. We'll have Noel Dunlop, who's the director of ANT, to talk about the situation here in Australia. And our first speaker will be Matt Walden from ARENA. But just before we get started, I guess I'd first like to do, as we often do in Australia, and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hydrogen. Hydrogen is an amazing molecule, I think. My background is physics, and when you think of hydrogen, it's up there in the corner of the periodic table. It's a unique atom, as all atoms are unique. It has just a single little proton there, and it's highly reactive. And there's a lot of it around. If you look at the next element on the periodic table, helium, the ultimate non-renewable resource. I think it's criminal what we do with helium. There is only one source of helium. It comes from very slow byproduct of radioactive decay of natural ore bodies or of usually oil. And if you're lucky, the helium, the alpha particles, get trapped in a rock layer and they don't escape. The last discovery of a helium reserve was many years ago, I think 8 or 9 years ago in Tanzania, where they dug a hole through the rocks and they found helium. When you take it out of that situation and you pop it into a party balloon and you sing a few happy birthdays and off it goes, helium is lighter than air, it heads out into space, and it doesn't stop. You cannot get it back. There is no way that we can make helium, and it's gone. It doesn't react with anything. Hydrogen on the other... think about that when you do your party balloon next time, okay? Just don't. Hydrogen, quite different. Hydrogen's very keen to get an extra electron. And a couple of hydrogens will buddy up with an oxygen atom to share the electron, and that makes water, and we have an abundant source of that. And when you look at the energy involved in the hydrogen buddying up with the oxygen, you can get the energy back out again by separating them. Put energy in, you can separate the hydrogen and oxygen. That's called electrolysis. And then allow it to recombine in a controlled way, and we can pull the energy out of that. And if you do that in a fuel cell, we generate electricity. And the byproduct of all of that reaction is water. So for lots of good reasons, hydrogen is a really exciting energy source. And that has about exhausted my technical knowledge of the whole process. And now we'll go to people that really do know what they're talking about. So our first speaker is going to be Matt Walden. He's the Director of Business Development and Transactions at ARENA. ARENA is the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, and they're looking at how we can realise investments at large scales in Australia to look at alternate energy sources. And would you please join me in welcoming Matt up to the front?
I'm a bit nervous actually with that introduction, people who know what they're doing, but anyway, we'll see how we go. Actually, I was working with Amy, Philbrook and Anton, who some of you might have met in our team in Sydney, around what sort of content could we talk about tonight, or what subject matter could we cover off, and it was difficult actually, because I think a lot of the material that we'll talk about here, and hopefully there'll be insights that come with it, is fairly consistent. I think that's a sign that the conversation's still evolving, but it's sort of getting more and more towards the need to actually make tangible advancements. I think is sort of how I'd summarise it. But what I'll talk through tonight in the talk is a bit of background on ARENA. I'm sure 90% of the people here know who we are and what we do, but I'll cover that off just for completeness, the investment priority side, and emphasise the role that hydrogen plays across that. How we're seeing the market evolving, and I thought in terms of sort of some insights, probably a bit of context on our investment pipeline. So that's projects that have come to us at early stage, advanced stage, and where they're at and what they're looking at and what sort of challenges they're having. So, to be honest, I think that's where the sort of most insight's going to be. As I said, I think a lot of the material and background context is really already in the public domain. As I said, it's really creating the case for moving forward today. So people that aren't familiar, the organisation was established in 2012 with a mandate focused on renewable energy, technologies underpinning it, and further penetration in the market. The organisation currently runs to 30 June 2022, so a 10-year life. And I think the last public number we put in the domain was about $350 million of remaining funding commitment. The other information is, I suppose, since giving a similar talk to a similar audience in the past, has been since that federal election, I suppose, has sort of solidified our workings, particularly from sort of an investment point of view, is that we've got to deal with what's in front of us, and that is that remaining investment spending, the investment priorities are working towards, and the appetite, or the strong appetite, to continue to do more work in hydrogen. So I like to tell people, for us, business as usual, and nothing's changed, because on both political spectrums there weren't any sort of direct commitments to ARENA. There were sort of to the broader renewables and hydrogen space, but for us it's very much sort of blinkers on, and this is our investment mandate. This is the cards we've got to play, and let's get on with it. So that's where we are at the moment. There's I suppose, an interesting graphic that people might not necessarily have seen, but just some context on our portfolio to date. So originally the organisation was seeded with sort of circa $2 billion of funds to invest, and that number now is sort of the 1.4 number has been invested across sort of 400 to 500 projects. Total value, I think that's actually a bit understated, so $5.5 billion of project value, quite well spread there across geographies as well, which is good and positive to see. And equally from a technology point of view, with some fairly material wins to date in the R&D space. I think we're quite proud of that portfolio, and as well as a few people would have been involved in, for example, the solar commercialisation space. So across the top there, you can see that solar PV has actually has been that sort of the mainstay, if you like, of that investment to date. But that is slowly leveraging towards, and I'll cover the investment priorities on the next stage, as to where we see that remaining $350 million spent. But again, I think I always like to emphasise that ARENA's objective, or return on investment, I'd like to say is financial, because in some cases where we do share risk, there is that return of investment, albeit only to the value that we invest. But it is that knowledge sharing side of things. So again, I think we're quite proud of the portfolio. In terms of the hydrogen space, I think that's still evolving. There's some very interesting work out of the publicly known projects, including ATCO, which is going to include a fairly comprehensive and detailed, I'll call it a tool, if you like, to understand key drivers in the conversion of municipalities to hydrogen, and inclusive of transport. So that's something that's on the near-term horizon that I think is going to gain a lot of traction and continue the debate. So again, putting positive information into the public domain. So the investment priorities, and I might touch on this because hydrogen does cover off a couple of these. So the first one, the delivering secure and reliable electricity, and that quite easily defined, picks up the work we're doing in grid integration, energy storage, large and small scale distributed energy, but also seeing a lot more interest in terms of hydrogen's role as an interseasonal storage medium. So it was interesting to I attended a conference by the Energy Storage Alliance group, where a lot of the conversation with international guests was the battery, pumped hydro, etc. But then the question became what about beyond that? And I don't think that debate has probably solidified itself too much. And I know attending the Energy Networks conference and the Bioenergy Australia conference last week, that again is starting to get some airplay. So I do think that's sort of a conversation that's still evolving and needs to be front and centre, along with the near-term deployment works. Solar PV R&D, I think quite self-explanatory, and I think Australia is really a leader in terms of IP development, albeit that IP is then exported and monetised in other countries, but that's something we continue to focus on, and there's a lot of leading institutions in Australia at the moment. Energy productivity, so both the built environment, supply side, demand side, picks up work, for example, our energy from waste portfolio and bioenergy work fits under that banner primarily. But as flagged there, renewable hydrogen, decarbonising the transport networks is quite an interesting one that is continuing to get a lot more interest. And again, if you think about it in terms of industrial application, displacing or decarbonising the gas network as well. And the fourth one, and probably the most prominent position we have on hydrogen, is really around that exporting opportunity. So that is the AC Allen view, the Commonwealth Alan Finkel view around here's this massive opportunity that's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years away. And I think that number almost doesn't matter because our focus in particular is sort of how do we get there, how do we start that journey. And it won't be an LNG export industry overnight. It's really going to be saying, how do you see domestic understanding, domestic knowledge, domestic bankability to get the sector going? So and again, that's some of the work that we've done with a number of people in the room. So some projects public, such as the work with Gemina and ATCO in WA, and obviously the great work that the South Australian Government's doing with AGIG in Adelaide as well. But there are a number of projects that are following that are continuing that journey. So that's the primary angle under which we've done the majority of our hydrogen work to date. So here's, I'm probably going to put forward a couple of slides that people are relatively familiar with now, but I thought, for the sake of completeness and chewing up my speaking allotment, I thought I'd cover it off. But in this graphic, I think self-explanatory, but again, I think it's quite helpful to understand the different hydrogen sources. And again, my focus, personally particularly, is more on the scale deployment or pre-commercial scale rather than the sort of the earlier conversion or hydrogen sourcing technologies, as well as the carrier side. And I think we're relatively agnostic to that. But where my focus to date, and in the last slide I'll talk to, is really around that utilisation at endpoint. Is how do we seed these activities? How do we build the commercial case for supporting activities in this space that then build the commercialisation of the underlying technology, whether it's electrolyzers or otherwise. So it is saying, how do we get to scale, and then how do we build the most commercially compelling case at that end user point? And I think anyone that's dealt with ARENA before would be well akin to how much we focus on the commercialisation story. So any investment paper, any board paper we put together has a huge chunky section on it that says, here's our opinion, here's our analysis. It says, by doing this project, you're starting that journey towards zero government investment requirement. I think that's absolutely critical. So it is a combination of cost down, which again, the OEM guys in the room would have a good view on that, and I think we've had the chance to share some of those views in terms of what's the local component, which could be quite material. What's the international component that we probably have limited influence over. So I think that's still a really interesting one. Just a quick aside back to large-scale solar, where our analysis before we did our solar round was that the local component was anywhere in the region of sort of 40 to 60% of the cost. And in speaking with industry participants, that was where the key driver was going to be, is bringing down that local cost, that local contingency, that local margin, etc. And I think there's a similar case here, but I think there's still the question around how big is that, how material is that cost component. And then the flip side to that argument is the revenue proposition. Is how do we get the revenue recognition for these projects? And the storage analogies, how do you for example, get the benefits that your technology brings to the market? How do you actually monetize that, which is quite difficult. And I know people will hate it, but the concept of green premium, how do we start to build that and understand what that looks like and get people actually paying it? So this is a fairly critical one, and I think at that utilisation endpoint there probably are other subcategories under that, but again that's the sort of lens that we're looking at it from. So the Australia why now? I mean, it's an interesting one. My personal one is that the CFO's tasking me to do stuff in hydrogen. I've got to find stuff, so that's my personal one. But from an organisational point of view, I do think it is, every conversation we're having is leading to the same story, and I think everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet, and it's really taking the steps. And I know people are quite, I think feasibility fatigue is probably a common terminology that people are using, and I think that's fair enough. I think that's absolutely fair enough. Our role is really to drive projects through, and another area I look after is the pumped hydro world, and I think that's materially different, where you've got sort of a $20 million development cost, a 5-year plus development horizon, where there is the need to start that journey early and seed these projects to get them through. Whereas I think here at the stage where we've got to get on with it, in effect. We've got to hurry up, which is good because I'm planning to skip over this slide. And this one this is an interesting one, and again a slight analogy back to large scale solar, where we did the analysis around how do we actually start to monetize, or how do we bring that commercialization journey along. And the case of the revenue story is quite easy, because you had an instantaneous national electricity market where you could sell an electron into at a merchant or a contracted price, but relatively low risk. You were sort of more focused on the cost side. How do you bring the cost down, because that revenue side was there. Whereas here I think we've got a much more complex scenario in terms of it is equally importantly that cost. It is the network integration, and whether that's the gas network or the electricity network, but it's that commercial side of things as well. So it's it has its challenges, but I think that the difference I'm seeing is the level of alignment in industry is, in my personal view, much stronger than I did see at that start of that solar process. This one, and I'll thank Martin for his help with this one. and this slide is actually, funnily enough, has got extremely mixed reactions. So some people have spoken extremely positively for it. Some people, equally the flip side, have commented quite negatively in terms of potentially being too aggressive or simplifying it, or otherwise. But I do actually like this a lot, and I think hooked my executive and board on this concept already. And that is, and part of it is actually a bit of a sales pitch even for ARENA, is where you see that dotted line across the bottom saying this is the concessional investment required by government to unlock this potential massive capital, this massive industry, both in terms of domestic investment as well as that export revenue opportunity. And it is important to move along, as we are at 2018, with sort of very important subscale de-risking activities. And I don't mean subscale in any way a negative term. It is de-risking the sector at the lowest possible cost. So again, applaud the work that, for example, that Gemma is doing, and AGIG with the South Australian government is going along that route. But as we've sort of flagged that where my sort of focus is, and my neck on the line within our organisation is moving towards the next level up, is how do we start to seed these larger commercial projects or commercial scale projects that seed the sector going forward. And there's a few bullet points there that, and again, covering off probably on my next slide, really around what we're seeing is it is these areas. The economics are still extremely challenging. I don't think there's any misconceived view that the role that ARENA is going to need to play in the first few of these deployments is going to be material, very material. But there's still that importance in terms of doing the right project with the right organisation for the right outcome. It needs to make sense and continue on that journey. And again, we are bringing, for example, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and Kneisz are very much in tune to this. That they understand the sector, and they're coming along for that ride as well. So this is sort of something a bit new, but what I thought I'd do is I was just going to talk a bit about what we're seeing, what our investment pipeline's made up of, and it is it's not over-representative in terms of other subject matter areas such as the broad category of energy storage, but it is healthy, and the thing that really impresses me is that it's a good mix of very reputable organisations as well, which is a bit sort of unseen, I think, from our organisation's point of view. A fair mix between feasibility natured funding and project level funding. I think we're finding the project level side of things quite difficult to pull those cases together. Understanding what that economic gap is, how do you quantify it, what's the role for ARENA, where are the risks, how do you then get that respective board or executive to sign off on that investment. That is very challenging on the project side. The feasibility side, less so. And I think people are turning to ARENA for almost their expertise and our for example, our advisory panel's expertise, where the level of funding being put into these projects probably isn't material from that organisation's point of view, but having that buy-in and support, and obviously the badge of the Commonwealth Government, I think is beneficial. Range of counterparties. So again, I think flagging that's been a big range of people, everywhere from the gas transmission, transport, fossil industries, existing natural gas operators, industrial gases, industrial feedstocks, remote area power. So that whole gamut of as I sort of flagged before, there's multiple parties in those sectors that are having the conversation, which I think is fantastic. So then, lastly, and to conclude and to sort of state the obvious, I think the role of ARENA is, importantly speaking at events like this, to continue to give the confidence that this is a investment priority that we take very seriously. Talk up the projects that we've worked with and the benefits that they bring and the knowledge that comes out the back of it. So again, I think that's extremely important. And the interesting one there, that third bullet point from the bottom, I think is an important one. And it is saying, how do we work with people who are going to drive that next phase? So if we do this project, how can you convince us that you're going to do the next one and the next one after that? So that's where it sort of comes down to the quality of that counterparty, that we see that of vital importance in dealing with people who are going to drive that sector forward. And just to conclude, it is to keep listening to industry. So people who have projects like this, we've got a dedicated team that work only on this subject matter now, and we would absolutely welcome a meeting or a coffee to talk through your idea or concept and how it may or may not align with our priorities. So thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Alan Kneisz, and he's the Business Development Director at Hydrogenics. So Hydrogenics is a company that obviously Alan will tell you more about, but they have been involved in components for hydrogen generation and electricity for hydrogen for some time. And what Alan's going to talk about, by the way, Alan is the Business Development Director responsible for the Asia Pacific region, so he's based in Malaysia. It's great to have you down here, Alan. Thanks for coming down. The company has a very unique perspective on what the global economy is doing in hydrogen, and Alan's going to give us a bit of an introduction as to what's going on. So,
okay, thanks everyone for attending. A lot of this industry is about, a lot of people are very passionate about it, and I have to say, I've been coming here 7-8 years talking about hydrogen, and finally people are listening. And it's really, I strongly believe what's happening here and how Australia's goals of becoming a hydrogen superpower will be fulfilled. It'll take time. It's going to be a lot of work. And the biggest thing, I'm developing friendships here too. And that's important as well. We all do business, but we are developing friendships and communication together. And, if I have a few more drinks later tonight, none of you will say you're my friend, but needless to say, it's important to develop those, because I think all of us believe in what we're doing. And going out for a beer or coffee or dinner is important to understand where we're going and how we can work together better. I've developed friends, Warner, who's somewhat of a competitor, Hyundai, competitor, but we're friends, right? We get along, we have a good laugh, and we believe in what we're doing. We believe in hydrogen, so that's really important. What I wanted to talk about was how hydrogen's evolving. And I wrote these slides myself, don't worry, but I still have to see them. But I strongly believe hydrogen was a gas in industrial processes and other things for many, many years. We've been doing that since actually way back from 1948 as a company. But we're evolving now. We're evolving the electric vehicle to the lowest emission vehicle available today. And that's using, of course, green hydrogen. evolving renewable energy to allow it to capture all that renewable energy. No curtailment required. And we at Hydrogenics feel we're at the center of this because we're a fairly unique position. I think we're the only company in the world that does fuel cells and electrolyzers. So we're involved in both sides of generation and usage of hydrogen. Just a few highlights on our company. Some of the key ones, we've deployed over 2,000 systems on fuel cells. Today, we've actually deployed over 1,500 electrolyzers globally, 500 running today. Supplied over 60 fueling stations, and we are a NASDAQ listed company. Some of our products, very quickly, both from the fuel cell side, we do mobility products, our high PM HD models, and power as well. We're still actively involved, especially in countries like Korea, in power. And on electrolysis, as I mentioned, since 1948 on alkaline, but more recently in PEM electrolysis, where we are moving what I would say is the scale up of hydrogen, where we're scaling up into very large systems, into multi-megawatt systems. Some notable achievements. We don't do a lot of marketing as a company. I admit we're fairly weak, but some of the first, we have the first fuel cell train operating in Europe. That's very exciting. We're actually expanding that quite aggressively into 3 or 4 more countries now. We actually built the first fuel cell plane. We have the world's largest fleet in China in fuel cell buses. Various countries and fueling stations. You notice most of those are in Scandinavia. No poke at our competition there. But hydrogen generation, critical backup power, and a few others. My competition's here, so we'll have a good laugh after, so that's okay. On the fuel cell side, that's our hydrogen train operating in Europe today, the world's first, running a 200 kilowatt module. So we're evolving the electric vehicle. We're evolving to where we believe for heavy duty transport, it's the most logical way of decarbonizing transport. We are increasing applications. We've deployed the first fuel cell ferry in San Francisco, or we're in the process of deploying that, but won a contract recently. A large amount of planes, trains, and trucks and buses. We'll have new announcements on trucks very soon. We work with Freightliner, Iveco, and others as well. As I mentioned, now it's actually over 2,500 systems, the fleet in China. So everybody talks about the Toyota fleet for the Olympics at 100 buses. We've had 75 buses running for the last year already in the Olympic site near Beijing. The trains in Europe, we've already signed with 6 states in Germany, and we've also signed now in the UK and France as well. And we are expanding our agreements with Scania and UPS, 17 trucks with UPS, and this is a large scale megawatt system in Korea at a refinery. So we are working with the oil and gas industry in that. And this is the world's first hydrogen powered taxi that goes into the air. It actually had a huge stock bump in our company. It's a very small project, but everybody was excited about this project because it's a pretty cool project. These are just some of the platforms that we use. We have a large amount of platforms. One of our platforms has over 600,000 operating hours of operation, so we have a long history, some technological advances that nobody else has in the industry. So we've been working very strongly in fuel cells for a long time. And this is the module that we use today. The outline there is our closest competitor in terms of size. So we also have the smallest size system available today. These are just some of the pictures, lovely pictures of the different sizes of systems. This is the train system, the 200 kilowatt, but we have very small systems as well. Electrolysis, and this is obviously the interesting area here in Australia recently in terms of large-scale electrolysis plants. So as I mentioned, we're evolving from using it primarily in industrial uses. Steel manufacturing, glass manufacturing have been the primary uses for many years, but now we're looking at competing with steam reforming of natural gas. We know that will take time. It will happen, but it's something that's in progress. Australia is very unique in the sense of you have large use of hydrogen, ammonia, etc., but you also have very low-cost renewables. And I think Australia is in a very unique position, not just from an export perspective, but from a domestic perspective, to use what we call green hydrogen today and maximize a lot of the renewable energy. A lot of people I've talked to have said there's curtailed wind, for instance, in many places. Why not create hydrogen? Oops, wrong way. This is our evolving hydrogen production to large scale. These are our PEM units. We've deployed the world's first PEM megawatt system, single stack system. That was in 2015, I believe. Today, nobody else has replicated that size in terms of energy density in a single stack. And we will continue to expand on that. We will be deploying a 2.5 megawatt soon. And we are recently moving into large-scale partnerships. Air Liquide has invested in our company recently, 20% ownership. And on the top right, that's the design for our 20 megawatt plant. This is the world's first or largest, actually times 4, of any electrolysis, renewable electrolysis plant. They're primarily using hydro energy for the power for this large plant, and we're in the process of deploying that actually in Canada. And the place is called Bécancour. Nobody can pronounce it in Australia, so Bécancour. We've done a lot of work, especially in Europe. We deployed, I think, 80% of the power to gas projects over a megawatt in Europe. We have a lot of experience in that area, and we hope to bring that here as well. This is just some pictures. So that was our first power to gas project in the top left at Falkenhagen. I believe that was the first one globally. And the E.ON, our main customer, said, what can you do to reduce the size and scope of these projects? And this is where we were challenged to create better technology. And we started producing the PEM units. So there's our 1 megawatt industrial alkaline and our 1 megawatt PEM there. So you can see the large footprint reduction. We see obviously a lot of other technical advantages to that. But what we believe is large-scale hydrogen production. We have the right solutions available, whether it be medium scale in our alkaline systems, but also large scale in the very large power to gas projects or green hydrogen projects that we see here happening in Australia. This is where we're evolving in terms of very large production. What we're trying to understand and believe is there's a lot of applications for this. There's applications for mobility, decarbonizing fuels, and what we're trying to relate is how we can use our technology to decarbonize the fuel process. And here's some examples and sizes and scope of the systems. We're happy to talk more about this obviously after and offline, but we believe that this is the way forward to hit parity in the future, in the near future, with steam reforming. Renewable hydrogen solutions obviously have a lot of applications: power to mobility, power to fuel, power to industry. And that's the advantage of hydrogen. As you mentioned, it's just the first element. But the advantage of hydrogen is its applications. It's more easily transportable compared to moving a battery. It's a lot easier moving hydrogen. So we believe that the applications for hydrogen, it's not just fueling your vehicle or your car. It's fueling or mixing, or it's blending. There's so many applications available, and we're doing a lot of those, especially in Europe, but we'd like to do more here in Australia as well. So evolving our role in Australia's energy transition, we are making great partnerships here with ANT and others in Australia. We believe we can use our leading position in electrolysis and fuel cells to localize. We are doing investigations. We already are localizing on our fuel cells with ANT in terms of doing the balance of plant here. We can do that also with electrolysis very easily, we believe, on large-scale deployments. We are engaging more and more and understanding the dynamics here in Australia. Australia, like any country, is very complicated, but we need to understand on how we can play, how we can be a partner with the local companies here, and how we can add value in terms of adding our technology into the mix here in Australia. We're fairly meek that way, and we're very open to those partnerships. We're not, how would you say, an arrogant company. We're fairly down-to-earth people. We're Canadian and Belgian, sorry, and we're a lot like Australians, I think, in a lot of ways. But what we believe is we have to invest the time and energy to work with Australia in something I believe, and I talk to our colleagues in Canada and Europe, but I also talk to a lot of people when I go on trips. I go to China almost every month, and I tell them that Australia will be a hydrogen superpower. And I strongly believe that Australia has the capability, it has the right dynamics, and I think in the future you'll see hydrogen, center of gravity, moving from Japan and other places to here. You have to build the applications. All the people in the room here have to be a part of this, but I think Australia will be a hydrogen superpower, and the challenge goes out to all of us who believe in it. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Our next speaker is from ANT, and Noel Dunlop is the exec director there. He's going to talk about the energy solution, Energy 4.0, Hydrogen Energy 4.0. It'll be a perspective from an Australian point of view, but I think you'll see a lot of similarities with what's been talked about before.
Firstly, I'd like to thank some people because I'll forget afterwards once I've done the talk. I get all excited and I like to talk. So thank you to Erol Harvey for emceeing the night. To Anna, Renee and Christina for helping organise and actually make this event happen. This doesn't happen without these people, so thank you very much from the team. Thank you to HMA and the people who came across from HMA from the AGM meeting today. Thank you for coming across, I really appreciate it. And I'd like to mention Claire for her help in advertising the night and her work she's done for HMA over the last year and a half. She's done a fantastic job. I'm going to make this really short because I'm now staying between you, a couple of questions and drinks. So I'll rush through this as fast as I can and feel free to ask questions later. Hydrogen 4.0, new paradigm. Why 4.0? Well, welcome to the revolution. Revolution we just heard about from Alan and from Matt from Arena and where we think we're going, and you listen to the chief scientist, you listen to Erol Allen, you listen to the CSIRO Hydrogen Roadmap and Richard Day from South Australia, who led the South Australian Roadmap, which was the first one in Australia and groundbreaking work in Australia. So thank you to the South Australian government and the work they've done as well. We believe driving a sustainable future through innovative hydrogen-based solution is an answer. It is one of the ways, and it's not a silver bullet, but it is one of the ways of the future. And it's really important. I think we need to think about sustainable future and how we do that. It's something that's come up in the last election and will come up again and again. And people want to see change. And it was talked about at the HMA meeting today as well. Change is important. Don't be scared of it. It is happening and it will continue to happen. Who are ANT? We're leaders in hydrogen-based solution. We started this 7 years ago, so our timing is really lucky, 7 years later. We've worked with Hydrogenics predominantly now for about 5 years. In 2017, we signed an agreement, become an integrator with them, and we've put a lot of money and time into integrating their HD30 fuel cell, which is the 600,000 hours plus it's got working into energy applications. So you can now plug it into a standard Australian inverter. You don't need any other work, it just goes and plugs and plays for remote energy applications, which I'll talk about later. Why Hydrogenics? Because they're the Intel of the world. We want Hydrogenics inside our solutions. They are the leaders. We believe they are the leaders. There's competition. There's competition in the room who will try to catch up. ITM, Siemens, Noel, a lot of them. But we believe we try to partnership and try and form strategic supply chains, which are important about developing supply chains right across Australia, and the people in the room will help do that. Fourth industrial revolution. This is why hydrogen 4.0. We started off with mechanical power, steam, and that was mentioned in the HMA meeting earlier today as well. And that was the first generation of the industrial revolution. Then came mass production, forward assembly lines. Computers and automation transformed the industrial revolution. Now we're going into cyberspace and everything, Internet of Things, and that's the fourth revolution. So Internet 4.0 is talked about, and it's well heard of. Hydrogen's done the same journey since back in the 1900s. Went through the similar journey. Hydrogen was used in the blimps, it was used in balloons for wars. in the early 90s, early 2000s, it was coined as the hydrogen economy coming. Hydrogenics were there, Noel and Proton were there. People are coming along after that. Now, what's driving this, and I think the chief scientist talks about this well, and Matt talks about it well as going forward, it's the hydrogen market. It's the world's changing, the Paris Accord. People want change. People want a more sustainable future. Hydrogen energy market globally is forecast to grow 30 to 50% a year over the next 10 years. That's 30 to 50% a year. No other industry in the world is expected to forecast to grow that rapidly. This is not me saying, this is independent people. Hydrogen energy storage and applications estimated in Australia alone is $24 billion over the next 10 years. Hydrogen export market from the Erol report that Matt mentioned is somewhere between $76 and $985 billion by 2025, if that's actually achievable. These are huge numbers. How do we play a role in that? Why do we team up with Hydrogenics and other people in the room to try to deliver this? When we looked at this 7 years ago, there was lots of component suppliers. Hydrogenics is one of the few who actually do both fuel cells and electrolyzers. But one of the problems in getting the market, and I don't know if many people know ACTA. ACTA was an Italian technology, went bankrupt 3 times. Small electrolyzers, quite good technology. Needed some robustness about it, but kept running out of money because they needed other parts of the ecosystem to actually survive. We actually thought, well, how do we do that? And how do we make that ecosystem work? We went about working with Hydrogenics and other suppliers and worked out there was a lack of actual integration in a modular fashion. I'm not quite sure if Cranston's in the room tonight, but Cranston's one of the few people who can actually do some considering engineering and actually give you a bespoke solution in Australia. That each time adds cost and money. To drive the price down that Matt was talking about, to actually make it more economical, to get what Alan was talking about, to make Australia a hydrogen superpower, we need modular-based solutions that can be scaled up from kilowatt to multi-megawatt. We need to integrate these solutions and drive down the cost of green hydrogen and then drive down the utilisation and applications of green hydrogen. So we've done a lot of work with the team over the last 2-3 years. We now have a plug-and-play fuel cell system based on the 30 kilowatt fuel cell, which has got 600,000 plus hours of operation that can be used in many applications to replace diesel gensets right now, economically. We worked up with Siemens and talked about the Northern Territory applications up there, and we're working on a project right now on that. The other side is the large-scale stuff for Hydrogenics and power electronics, and Alan started touching on that. We're working on a project right now, which I can't give names of, where we're actually driving down cost of the balance of plant, driving down integration, using local Australian supply chains to drive the balance of plant, using the world's leading larger-scale PEM electrolyser. This is critical if Australia wants to take the next step. And the only way of driving that cost down, and our key client and Hydrogenics both believe that scale will help make that happen. Scale is really critical. We think we can deliver that in a large scale, but more importantly, the work we're doing out of that and the other work we're doing with our research, which I'll get on the next slide, is actually allowing us to drive down the small scale as well. We've invested $5 million of our own money and the federal government's money in research over the last 3 years to look at the next generation of small-scale electrolysers. It's something that Hydrogenics haven't put much money in because they've been focused on the larger scale. We're working collaboratively with them at the moment to make sure that can happen. We've got a project going on in conjunction with 4 other industry players and Monash University who are leaders in that area and already had a start-up which has been brought up and sold off to America and further American work going on. We want to try to keep it in Australia. We believe the next generation will allow the removal of compressors, which reduces the cost of small-scale systems by over 1/3 instantaneously. The other work we're doing with small-scale fuel cells with Hydrogenics and integrating them with the electrolyser work reduces the price by 2/3 overall for a small system. This is an indication of what we think a 30 kilowatt system costs right now. That includes the solar right through. We think we can get that to less than 600,000. What's that mean in real terms? Impact. Currently, for a diesel replacement of a 30 kilowatt remote system, which I know there's lots of in South Australia, Western Australia, Queensland, we've been talking to all of them. Currently there's about a 7-year payback. Diesel gensets have a life of 10 years. This means there's 3 years to make your interest repayments and to get nothing. Money for nothing for the energy you're generating at the current cost of diesel generation. No CO2 emissions. A 30 kilowatt diesel generator will produce over 1 million kilograms of CO2 emissions every year. So that's 10 million plus CO2 emissions you're getting reduction by just replacing a plug-and-play fuel cell system with green energy. However, we don't want to stand still. Our work we're doing is to drive that to 2 years. 2-year payback becomes a standard business decision, and that's where we want to be over the next 3 to 5 years. Emerging solutions. As I said earlier, there's no silver bullet, and Matt's put a lot of money into a whole range of different things from ARENA to try to solve the energy storage issues. We, however, believe we have solutions right now with strategic partners, our own proprietary hardware and software that makes 24/7 off-grid solutions better than diesel, and a no-brainer for most people to try to start to implement. Yes, they need some reliability issues and comfort that it's actually going to happen. That's where ARENA and other people come in. And point-of-source systems, where renewables can be designed and used cheaply for large systems and small to produce green hydrogen. Thank you for listening. I appreciate everyone coming tonight.
So I hope you'll agree, some fascinating talks. Matt talks about what is the role of government in kickstarting all of this. Alan gives us a very optimistic and I think a very attractive view of hydrogen being a huge opportunity for Australia, and Noel putting up those remarkable numbers of hundreds of billions of dollars. I guess to kick off, first question from me, when industries grow that quickly, 30 to 50%, everything gets stressed in the system. It's hard to find finance, it's hard to find your path through regulatory stuff, it's hard to find the skills required to deliver those sorts of things. I'd be interested in the panel's comments on where there are any particular skill gaps in being able to move as quickly as we need in hydrogen.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, I think drawing analogies back to that solar example, and I might keep harping on about it, but the example there is that when we did some of our first initial investments in the first couple of projects in Australia, you could see the counterparties involved in those. It was the first solars, was the EPC contractor, the supplier, equity investment. The Canadian solar was the same. The Chinese companies that sort of restructured themselves, and that evolved over time. Where in the intermediary period, you started to introduce select financial investors to the point now where there are specialist investment funds that are set up purely to invest in that renewable market, and again I'm focused on that because that's my sort of main background. But I do see this as an opportunity to move into a similar thing where once we start to de-risk with people like Hydrogenics and some of the other parties in the room, Siemens for example have made positive noises about that as well, is that it is the seeding and de-risking of the technology, particularly from the financing side, that then leads to the evolution where it becomes an investable asset class that lowers that cost of capital and makes it a mainstream technology. So that's the vision that I've got. I think there's a bit of time to get there, but the critical thing is to get the job done today.
It's an interesting thing because IT bubbles and other things are growing much more rapidly and much more quickly, but one of the things that we were at the HMA, and we're one of the few small companies in HMA along with H2H and some other people. Industry bodies such as HMA are really critical in ensuring that regulation as an industry whole and everyone in the room compete. Whilst competitors are collaborating to build the industry, those numbers can't be reached by any one company. It is a collaboration, there's a growing industry. We need to compete where we need to do that in the appropriate ways, but we also need to collaborate to ensure that there's regulations, that there's standard approaches to doing things, that safety is critical and that the public perception of what's occurring is safe, and it's, spherically it's 7 times safer than natural gas, but we need to get that message out there. There was an issue just recently in Norway, where there was an issue with a refuelling station. But put it into context, there's 600 fires every year with traditional technologies in US alone. So one incident, there was no injuries, it was closed down, it was done safely, it was designed properly, And it's around designing things safely and properly, getting public buy-in. I think there is a will from the large industry players, and the 2050 gas vision talks about the gas having green hydrogen, biogas, and blue hydrogen or brown hydrogen as their gas sources of the future by 2050. It's an industry-led thing. It's irrelevant in government. I think once we get past those first 3-4 years coming forward and some assistance to gap that market economic balance, the scale will drive this, and the supply chains that we all can build will actually help Australia get there.
So that's on the finance side and the regulatory side, safety side. I guess from Hydrogenics' view, when it comes to operating these facilities, are there special skills needed, or what kind of backgrounds do you need from an operational point of view?
So the growth, you were mentioning 30 to 50%. When you look at the electrolyzers, the most critical part is the cell stack. So all of the rest of the technology is used in so many other industries, like the transformers, the gas purification, the balance of plants. So it is possible that in our case, Hydrogenics supplies the stacks, and the rest of the technology can be done here. So you can spread the efforts in cooperation between Belgium, Canada, and Australia.
I think that is an exciting opportunity for engineering businesses here. Yeah. Any questions? I'll throw it out to the floor. Yeah.
My name is
Where your area of interest
Paul
is?
Rasmussen. I work at Erol. I work in the energy space across energy storage of all forms and renewable energy, with an interest in hydrogen. From a fuel cell point of view, what are the limitations on size? Like, we've seen 1 megawatt fuel cell stacks already. What are the limitations on size, and do they boil down to mechanical, chemical, or thermal?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't really limitations per se. I mean, to give you an idea, our megawatt system today, it's a 100 kilowatt rack, 4 systems put in a rack together. We just replicate that over and over and over as many times as we like. We are looking at very big projects in Korea where we're looking at 20, 30, 40 megawatts range. So I guess there's no real limitations. The challenge today, I'm just being pragmatic, is costs. We are more expensive than traditional technologies in terms of generating power, but we need to scale up. And that's everything about the industry, whether it's electrolysis or fuel cells. It's about scaling up, producing more. A bit tinge of the last question, a lot of that can be done here. It's a bit of a travesty. Everybody tells me in Australia, you've lost the auto industry. Well, most of those components are automotive components that we use,
Or similar.
right?
Similar type.
The hoses, the pumps, everything. You've got all that skill set sitting here. People laid off, unfortunately, and they could be building fuel cells using those same bloody components as you used in your automotive industry, right? So that's a great thing that can happen here, where we're producing a lot of that was produced before here in Australia. We're already doing that on small scale with Ant already. We could be doing more of that. So we need to scale it up. I mean, building proof of concepts, having maybe ARENA showing a little bit of funding at the beginning. Let's be honest, fossil fuel industry has $5 trillion of subsidies every year. So let's not complain about the subsidies in hydrogen or renewable energy. They're a small fraction of what the fossil fuel industry gets today. So I think what we need to do is understand where the gaps are and the capabilities, but also just scale up. ARENA is doing great funding to do proof of concepts and look at very large scale projects. And we need to do that in the fuel cell and electrolysis space, where we can scale up, build local capability. Capabilities mostly are here in Australia already. They're kind of low-hanging fruit, they're available. But what we need to do is have those projects to put those people to work and put them in those projects.
I see some vigorous head nodding there. Sorry, can I just move on to another question we had over there? And again, could you introduce, by the way, this is seeding drink session. So I want you guys to grab these people afterwards. Alan has said he lubricates well with a little bit of alcohol, and you can get a whole lot of secrets from there. Sorry, yes.
So Simon Carey, so picking up that local capability point of view, and then more broadly around training, I mean, what do you see as the gaps here? You know, what do we actually need to go train that you can't retool in terms of from the university or vocational level?
I'll just speak on the fuel cell.
Okay.
I mean, on the fuel cell side, a lot of the balance of plant, that's easy, all that capabilities here. Understanding how a fuel cell
said
works.
that it was really hard.
Parts of it. Understanding how it works and how hydrogen works, that needs probably a little bit more work. I think there's a lot of understanding in academia here, but maybe not in terms of on the ground understanding. So to be fair, that needs a little bit of work, but having all the supporting components and everything, all that is here. I don't see a gap, but I see in terms of understanding how a fuel cell works, understanding the electronics and the hydrogen systems a little bit, that probably has a little bit of gap.
Build on that one. Yeah. So, you know, from a Canadian point of view, so does that mean effectively, you know, the work that went into Ballard Hydrogenics in terms of effectively the research centres, did that actually build up that capability and that, you know, having seen it go from one side to the other, which puts you in a different
Yeah, I
position,
mean,
or?
we have 2 corridors in Canada. You know, everybody calls Canada the cradle of fuel cells. You know, Ballard was the early adopter. Our company came only a few years later, and we developed, well, we bought into the electrolysis market, to be honest, but we also developed our own fuel cells in the 90s. So that started in academia. Our CTO today is our founder as well. He left university. He was studying fuel cells, and he left, and he started this company, which is Hydrogenics today. And yeah, I agree. A lot of that started in academia. You know, Noel, I think you're at Monetisation.
Yeah.
So that often is where the ideas start, and then they build it into companies, and obviously build it from there. And I think Noel might be better to speak to that, because he had the same journey as we had in Canada here in Australia.
I think in Australia, South Australia's led a lot of the way early on in their roadmap. The rest of the states are coming on board very rapidly and biting at their heels. With training, one of the differences we have in Australia is it's classified as a C2 gas, but it behaves very differently to most C2 gases. So whilst most gas plumbers should technically be able to do most of the stuff that we do and put things together, there's some differences, and there's some skill sets along that way that we need to train up within projects. The projects that we're doing, the project that Siemens are doing, with AGIG in Tonsley, the ITM project in WA, they're all critically important. And Matt talked about one of the key things, and when you get ARENA money to support you, is the knowledge sharing and the training coming out of those projects. And whilst it's a difficult process to go through sometimes, it is really critical as a business and an industry that we actually do go through that, and we do share the general learnings from things, and we do put money and time back into training the apprentices so they understand the differences between natural gas, LPG and hydrogen, which is lighter than air. It does behave differently. But you know, I've been using it for the last 20 years, from industry applications right through from research to chemical industry. It's not a new gas, but the problem is in Australia it's very new in many different applications, and so a lot of it's around getting our heads around that we should be trying this stuff here now. We should be funding it. We should be getting the commercial difference funded by governments and other places, and including the training as part of that. And we talked about that with Richard just today, about CRCs and other things which get students into projects to get them to learn, understand basics so they can work on stuff going forward.
So I think it's got a lot of the hallmarks of early technologies, but it's a technology that we've been talking about for 30, 40, 50 years. I remember a colleague of mine in the US telling me that from the invention of a technology to when it makes a GDP impact is always 32 years. Now, it's a beautiful statement because it's got no data, but it's been my life's mission to see if that's true. If it is, then definitely we're well over our 30 years in the hydrogen story, and it's an exciting time. Listen, there are trays of drinks waiting for people to take them up and to have conversations. I'm only going to take one more quick... Is it a quick question?
Mine?
Yeah?
Yes, Brett Cooper from Renewable Hydrogen. I'm going to target it at Matt. Matt, we've been talking a lot about the upstream production of hydrogen. What do you think we should be doing about developing the off-takers in our target markets in Asia?
Yeah, Brett, I think it's really important. And of those conversations that I sort of flagged we're having, I think there's an equal reference to people saying focus on the customer first and work backwards. So I think that's critically important, because there's no point developing something if that market's not going to be there. And I didn't do my slide, the strategic view around this massive $1 billion, because I think everyone subscribes to that. I think that's there. So I do think that conversation's got to happen, Brett. And if it is sort of the demonstration activities with the work out of Victoria, which again doesn't fall under our mandate, but I think equally important. But it is that conversation needs to happen. I just hate for them to be sequential activities rather than in parallel. I think that's the critical point.
Terrific point. Thanks for that. I think it is time for us to spend a bit of time networking outside. Will you please join me in thanking our speakers today? And also the sponsors of today, which were Ant, Hydrogenics and Arena. Thank you so much for your participation. And I think you should write in your diaries today as the start of an amazing journey for Australia. Thanks very much indeed.